There's maintenance jobs. If you want to turn a wrench, you can turn a wrench on airplanes. If you want to fly, there's so many different jobs in aircraft, from just private pilot's license to fly on your own, charter. So I know some pilots that literally just flew for like millionaires and billionaires, just flew them around on their own schedule, and that was it. The airlines, there's tons of stuff.
What's going on, everyone? It's another episode of the Talk About It podcast. I'm Lauren Fulmer.
I'm Victor Dantes.
And today we're excited to sit down and talk someone with some flying experience, a pilot license, and probably a whole bunch of other stuff you'll share with us. We have Eric Adkinsson with us. Eric, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. Well, I appreciate you hopping in with us. I know you do some help on the farm as well, and right now it's full-blown harvest season.
Yeah,
so,
we're right at the tail end right now.
So thanks for chalking off about an hour to come in and sit with us. We do greatly appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, things during harvest don't just happen by itself. So.
That's exactly right.
But yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who's Eric Adkinsson, if someone asks you that?
Yeah, so grew up in Roseville, Illinois. And then, long story, ended up down at the University of Florida. Went to college. And then from there, decided to join the Marine Corps. Joined the Marine Corps and through process became a pilot. So I was in the Marine Corps for about 9 years. Flew C-130s pretty much all over the world. Figured that was a good time after 9 years to come back home to the farm and then learn that there was a C-130 squadron over in Peoria. So I transferred, went from the Marine Corps to the Air Force or the Air National Guard over there and started flying C-130s with them. I flew with them for just under 4 years, and now I transferred, kind of took a desk job part-time down in Springfield. So that's kind of just the basic overall. So deployed all over, flown all over, but most all my time are in different models of C-130s. So that's the big ones.
Yeah, so I Googled it. So I have an idea, but yeah, for anyone else, a C-130, a C-2XL 4000, I just made that up, but none of it means anything to us. But what's a C-130?
So it's considered a tactical airlift. So for the Marine Corps, it's the biggest aircraft they have, and then for the Air Force, it's one of their smaller cargo. So the C-130 kind of does a little bit of everything. You can fly over the ocean with it one day, and then you can fly over 300 feet over the ground and land on dirt runways, and you can do airdrops with it. You can do gunships. You can do battlefield illuminations. The Hurricane Hunter guys, if you ever heard about down in the Gulf, that's a C-130. So they're a big propeller engine plane. It's the big ones you actually see flying around here low. You usually see two of them. That's the C-130.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Yep.
So they're packed full of equipment.
It depends.
Or depending on what's going on.
Shoot as well?
Some of them do. Yeah. It all depends on the variant and what they're set up for. In the Marine Corps, our main mission was aerial refueling. So we refueled jets and helicopters in the air. Obviously, we practice it, but we do it in combat as well, depending on what the mission dictated. We do what we call trash runs or log runs, so just moving cargo and people to and from where we needed to go. And then when I deployed, when I was in Afghanistan, we did have a gunship. We called it the Harvest Hawk. So we would do all those missions while deployed in Afghanistan.
Eric, how do you practice taking the fuel? What'd you call it again?
Aerial refueling.
Yeah. All right. So how does one practice that?
We do have a simulator, but
air.
For us, it's as a pilot, it's pretty easy. We just kind of maintain airspeed, altitude, and for a C-130, we have what's called drogues. So on each side, if you look at a refueling C-130, they have these big pods at the end of each wing, and in there is about a 95-foot hose. And at the end of a hose is a little drogue, which just looks like a circular parachute. And when we hydraulically push those out, it'll catch the air and it will pull most of the hose out. So for us, we just maintain airspeed, altitude, and then we talk to our receivers in the air, and we coordinate with them what side they need to go to, how much fuel they want, and then we'll clear them to plug. And it's really hard. It's harder for them. We're just sitting there with our headset and a cup of coffee, make sure we're not flying all over the place to maintain a stable platform for them. And then they, depending on what airframe it is, they'll have some sort of probe, and then they just maneuver their aircraft to plug into the drogue. And then it's a coupling. So once they come into the drogue, we are actually connected to them. And then once there's a secure connection, we can put fuel out to them, and they just fly in formation with us while connected.
So any sprays, any?
Oh yeah.
So it's getting sprayed.
It can spray, and depending on the initial connection, there can be a little bit of spray. If there's a bad connection, either on either side of theirs, they could be connected and spraying all over, and we have emergency procedures for that. Our load masters in the back, they are continually watching. So we can't see them from the pilot seats. So
Right.
our load masters are constantly on headset with us, telling us what they see, what the guy's doing. So not only are we listening or talking to the other guy or gal in the jet or the helicopter, what they're seeing and what they're doing, but we also have eyes and ears in the back telling us what to do. Because there may be something that the pilot can't see going on with their aircraft, so they'll let us know, and then we'll talk to the receiver. So there's a lot of communications going on.
Right.
Yep.
How long does it take to become a pilot for the Marines?
Typically,
And what it takes to become a pilot? Is that just
well,
anyone?
so there's a civilian side, military side, and both are kind of different. For the military side,
for military.
It depends. Marines are different than the rest. So if you were to go, Air Force or Army helicopters, once you get commissioned, you pretty much go straight to pilot training, a primary. Marines are different. Every Marine's a rifleman, so every officer has to go through what we call TBS, the basic school. So we all go through 6 months of infantry training. So we have to complete infantry training before we're allowed to have a pilot slot, if you enter the Marine Corps with a pilot contract. So for officers, you enter the Marine Corps in either a ground contract or air contract, and that's all you know. So you may fly a plane, you don't know what's going to be, or you may be infantry, you may be ground supply. You don't know until how you do, and then after TBS is done, that's when they tell you, hey, all right, you got pilots, you go to Pensacola, all the ground guys, here's your jobs, then you go. So for us, we do 6 months infantry training, and then we go down to, typically it's Pensacola is where we start. That's usually around 6 months of training if you don't have any waits or gaps in between. When I was there, I guess I'm kind of one of the old salty guys now. I flew the T-34, which is a older model, all what we call steam gauges, all analog, nothing glass whatsoever. We never went above 10,000 feet, hardly ever, so it wasn't pressurized. We didn't have oxygen. It was like flying an old Jeep. I mean, when we would do aerobatics, we could literally slide the canopy back and do it with, the top down and do loops and aileron rolls and stuff. But now they have a T6, which is all glass, very powerful. They're always above 10,000 feet. So that takes about 6 months. And at the end of that, you get a grade and you get a dream sheet. So on your dream sheet for the Marine Corps, you can put C-130s, maritime, you can put jets, you can put helicopters, or you can put Ospreys. So each one of them has like a grade requirement. And pilots finish every week, and then they select the next week. So you fill out your dream sheet, hand it in to the powers that be, and then you go to a selection kind of ceremony, and that's what they tell you what you got. And it all ends up being the needs of the Marine Corps. You could have had the highest grades, you want jets, and then that week all they needed was helicopter pilots. Congratulations, you did really well, you're going helicopters. Or you didn't want to go jets, but you're only one with jet grades, you're going jets. So. And then based on what you get selected for after primary, then we all split up and go to advanced training. Advanced training the timeline's different. Jets are usually the longest. It's about an extra year. They go down to, I don't know if it still is, but Meridian. They go to Meridian and do jet training. For C-130s, we go down to Corpus Christi, Texas, and fly a multi-engine. It's like a King Air C-90, I believe. We call it the T-44. So we fly that. That lasted about another 6 months. And then helicopters stay in Pensacola, and I think it's about 6 months for them. And if you go Osprey, you get a little bit of helicopters in Pensacola, and then you go down and get a little bit of multi-engine down in Corpus. Once we're done with advanced, then we go to our actual platform. So jets, when I was going through, we had 3 types of jets. So any of my buddies who went jets, once they're done with advanced, then they select it again, and it was either F-18s, Prowlers, or the Harrier, the vertical takeoff. One, which is now replaced by the F-35. For maritime, I got selected for maritime. So we only have C-130s. So as soon as you get selected for that, we know we're going C-130s. So then we go to our simulator trainer. So for C-130s, we don't have the actual airplane to train on initially. So we do about 5 to 6 months in I think it's called a Class D simulator, full motion, full visibility, full capability inside the cockpit of the aircraft. So we do all our training there. And then once we're done with that, then we finally get to our squadron and start our fleet tour. And that's the first time we actually touch the plane. So it usually takes, for Marines, including the 6 months infantry, it usually takes about a year and a half to a little over 2 years to just get to walk through the doors in your first squadron. When most like Air Force and Army, it usually takes maybe about a year.
Yeah.
So
what was that? What was that first experience like? Maybe not even just in your still training, but like this is for real. You know, now you have equipment, valuable merchandise, whether it's other men or, you know what I mean? Like what was that like? I can only imagine being like, don't mess this up.
I think so. The C-130 is a crewed aircraft. So we get used to obviously flying aircraft by ourselves as well in primary, because we have to do solo flights. So you go through that whole, well, there's nobody else in here anymore. But once you get to the C-130, it's not as daunting initially, because kind of the mentality like, well, I got the aircraft commander and the instructor there. Like, they know what's going on. So if I mess up, it's all good. I think the biggest thing is once you become an aircraft commander, now you're in charge of the plane, you're in charge of everybody in it, and you're in charge of the mission. So if your first few flights taking off and you're in charge of everything, like you start noticing, like, what's that sound? It's like the same sound it's always been. Man, like, are you sure? I've never heard that sound before.
Yeah. So
that's when you kind of get kind of more hyper aware, hyper focused, because like, oh, it really is on me.
Right. What can go wrong? What's the most common reasons of an accident?
Oh man. Human error.
Yeah.
And it always, so I was lucky enough, I got to go to Naval Safety School. So each Navy and Marine Corps, so the Navy and Marine Corps, we're kind of under the same department. We're a department of the Navy, the men's department specifically. But that's a joke. But I got to go through training, become an ASO. It's called Aviation Safety Officer. So there has to be at least one in each squadron. So we get trained on how to do like mishap investigations and things like that. But pretty much when you go through that 5-week course, you learn that every mishap, no matter what, you can trace it to human error. If there was a parts issue or mechanical failure, they can take that back down to there was probably improper maintenance done. So I guess to answer that question, it's usually always human error, some form or fashion.
Okay.
But depending on the aircraft, there's always emergencies.
Mm-hmm.
We practice emergency procedures all the time. And it really just depends on what the aircraft are kind of susceptible to. We had 4 engines. So when I was flying the older models, we'd shut down engines quite a bit. Whether there was actually a real problem or something was wrong with our indications. So I've flown quite a bit, 3 engines on that 4-engine aircraft.
On purpose.
On purpose. Well, I was also a functional check flight pilot. So anytime maintenance would do anything before we could issue it back into the squadron, it had to get checked. So
you would test it and fly?
Yeah, that was our normal progression. Once you become aircraft commander, be an FCF, because it really gets you into the systems. So you would go, if they did something with the engine, the prop, we'd take it up and then we'd test it in the air and then shut it off, make sure it turns back on in the air, and then come back. So go ahead.
No, I was gonna say. So I believe the pilot needs to know about the mechanical stuff in the plane before you fly, because you need to check it out, right?
Yeah, it's very intensive. So when we're going through our basic ground schools and we get tested out, and even onward into the squadrons, when we do our check rides, you have to be able to be like, all right, draw the fuel system. Mm-hmm. So like we will draw the entire fuel system to include every check valve, every boost pump, every transfer pump. And then we're like, all right, so what does this one do? You know, your molecule of fuel starting in this tank, where do you go? You know, like, all right, so I'm doing this for my fuel, where do you go? And then you got to know the electrical system. Like, all right, draw the electrical system. You know, for us who don't draw very great, it looks like, you know, us Marines and crayons are just kind of sitting there like, well, this will be my airplane. It doesn't look the best, but we have to have a pretty functional knowledge of the aircraft, because Marine Corps specifically, we're pretty expeditionary. So we're off on our own a lot. So we have to kind of troubleshoot, deduce, and just do what we need to get the mission done.
Well, I was seeing like how important that would be, you know, if something happened and you go down, but you know, it didn't crash or whatever necessarily, but now you got to fix some stuff and it's just you.
Well, luckily
it's probably important you know where the stuff is and how it all works.
And in that scenario, we really rely on the enlisted crew. So for C-130s, you got 2 pilots up front, aircraft commander and a co-pilot, and then you have a center seater, which is a flight engineer, or the Marine Corps called it a crew master. And the crew setup is a little bit different with the newer models versus the older models. And then you would have a navigator, usually in the older models, and then 1 to 3 load masters in the back. So the engine experts were usually the flight engineer guys who sit right behind you. They monitor all the systems while you're flying. They're the guys that will literally smack you on the head if you do something right because it's their plane, or wrong, I mean, because it's their plane. And they usually came from maintenance. So most of those guys were either engine guys, prop guys, airframe guys. But to get to that point, at least on the old aircraft, they had to be able to perform maintenance on everything. So in the Marine Corps, we would break a lot on the older planes and land, and the flight engineer would be like, I got it. And he'd just go rob a part from some system we weren't using, or if we're on an Air Force base, maybe just take it from them or talk to them and maybe just acquire it. I didn't ask questions. They just say, I got the part, sir, and here we go.
You got one.
So we did a lot in the Marine Corps. We did a lot of expeditionary fixes on the ground. Yep. So Air Force operates a little bit different, but from the Marine Corps side, yeah, that's
Have you ever had to jump out of one?
No, thank God.
Have you ever gotten to, like, not have to? Okay, we're going down. We gotta jump. No. Have you ever jumped out of a plane?
I had a pretty long wait between TBS and flight school, so I tried, instead of just doing the fun little stuff they had us do in between, I tried to go to jump school, but the Marine Corps was like, that's not your primary MOS. We're not paying for it. So I really wanted to go to Fort Benning and go to jump school, but they're like, you get enough training.
Fort Benning's Georgia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about emergency landing?
I've done a handful of those. Yep, 3-engine, nothing too crazy, but we've definitely had fuel leaks, engine fires.
Usually human error.
Well, it could have been, but sometimes, depending on few of them actually were just when we landed was an indication problem. So whatever the system was that showed us either like turbine inlet temperature, like the coil on that busted, or I had one time where we had to shut an engine down and do a fire indication, but it was the newer model and the sunlight went through the cowling and hit the sensor, and sunlight caused it to go off. So we had to shut that engine down and do a three engine landing. So
are you still active now in the reserves?
I am now, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you still have you still actively fly?
No, I gave up flying about 2 years ago. So the whole
that's
flying got to be a lot, because I'd be up in the morning at a tractor and then I'd leave and go do a night flight and get home at 1 o'clock. So I took a desk job. So the job I have now, it's called a mobility planner. So you've had to have been a C-130 pilot, or what they call a mobility pilot in the Air Force, C-17, C-5. So now I work in AOCs, Air Operation Centers. So if you imagine, like, you're seeing movies and like Mission Control, and there's just TVs everywhere and guys sitting on desks, that's pretty much what it is. I'm just at the table, and I have a section, and I'm in control of about 5 people. And
where is that?
It can be anywhere. So our main base is in Springfield. So I drill out of Springfield, but we can go anywhere and assist any AOC. So pretty much my job is to stand behind the team, drink a cup of coffee, and say, yeah, that looks good. And if anything goes bad, then it's my fault. So
how does the reserves part work? Is that something you do as long as you choose to?
Yeah, as long as they'll keep you, and then also for you can go until you get a retirement, and then you can go all the way to 60 if you want. So I got about 4 years left before I have the option to retire and get benefits. But if I wanted to, I could stay in the Guard almost until I was 60 if there's a place for it.
Now, if we were to go to war, I mean, the reserve, you can get a presidential mobilization if you didn't volunteer. That happened after 9/11. There's presidential mobilization. A lot of Guard units around here mobilized and deployed for a while. So that can happen. You can also volunteer to go for units for now. So at this point now, if I were to deploy, it would be AOC. We may deploy overseas at an AOC, but there are some AOCs here in the States that control things overseas as well too. So I don't have to go do the tactical stuff that I used to do all the time. Right. Yeah. Well, and that's cool. You bring value in many different ways, especially as you get older and more experienced. You may not be best fit to go and to act like. I don't know.
I'm good. I've done enough of it too.
Sure.
So I'm definitely good for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you fly small planes too?
I've done a few here and there. It's just trying to carve out the time.
Yeah.
Between the farm, 4 kids.
Yeah.
So
the guard.
would the pilot license you have, does that allow you to fly
So
like any single prop or
you
smaller?
can if you take the test. So I actually got my private pilot's license while I was in college. So I did the civilian side before I even went to the military.
And that's called a private pilot
pilot's license. So
Okay.
I think the minimum age to get a private license is 15 nowadays, 15 or 16.
And lots of hours, so right?
Well, it's I don't know what it is. This was it's about 17, 18 years ago.
Sure.
It may have changed, and I'm not too up on the civilian requirements, but typically you go with an instructor and you got to go through, they outline what knowledge you need, and then they fly with you, make sure you can check out, and then you'll do a solo. And as long as you do all that, I think it was between the minimum hours needed to be checked out to have a check ride, I think it was 40 hours. I think I did, do it in college, and I spread it out over 2 years. I think I got about 70 hours before I actually did my check ride, but that was because I spaced it out for so long. And then I did everything else in the military. If you don't do that and you go straight military, a lot of the instructors there are signed off through the FAA to say, hey, just take this test and you'll get your private. So they kind of set us up to where if we want to get out of the military and then fly commercially, we've already done all the tests and stuff to ensure that we have on the civilian side that license done. We just need to kind of get out and get recurrent. And if there's anything else we want to do, we're already got that minimum level of certifications before we, instead of going all the way back to the drawing board when we have a ton of experience flying already.
Did you ever have any interest in getting out and flying for like Southwest Airlines or United?
No, a lot of my buddies did, but when you're gone 3 to 5 days a week, you're still gone 6 months out of the year.
Right.
So I was gone so much when I was in the Marine Corps. The kind of thing was like I want to be home as much as I can, but the airlines at the time didn't really appeal to me.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And even more now. I don't know. I feel like the flight industry is so crazy on the commercial side, right? Like, it's one of the things that. One of the rare things that you have to buy up front, right? You pay, and then you're not guaranteed the product.
No,
you're not. You can show up, and then they've bumped your flight, to the next day, and
it's frustrating.
Yeah, and you get no money, maybe a meal certificate. Yep. It's just such a weird industry.
It is, and I get from my perspective, I have pros and cons where, if there's maintenance issues or there's issues where it has to be slid, I'm usually sitting there looking at all my pilot apps or weather apps. I'm like, I don't want to fly through that either. So,
sure.
I can be a little sympathetic of the call to delay or not go. But then I'm not a fan of going through all the big airports because even when we went to civilian places, it was smaller places. We were the biggest game in town and we bought so much fuel for them. So, we kind of got treated like royalty. Well, then walking through, Chicago O'Hare and dealing with all that people. I was like, man,
just nuts.
So I do a lot of international flying now with this job, but as a passenger. So I'm kind of getting used to just being the guy in the back, put my headset on, and just kind of zone out a bit.
Are military planes safer than commercial, like those big commercial airplanes?
I'd say that's a loaded question because we do a lot more with our aircraft than say civilians. So depending on what we're doing, our risk, what we call ORM, operational risk management, that we try to mitigate as much risk as we can. But we know we're going to do something extremely dangerous with this aircraft, whether it's going into a zone where there could be enemy fire, or we're going on a unsecure field that we don't know if there's potholes or what's going on. So and depending on what we call a threat matrix, a hire will tell us, hey, you need to go do this mission, but we don't want you to take any damage to the aircraft or loss of life. All right, cool. Well, then it might get to a point where we want you to do this mission, even if the aircraft doesn't come home. Oh, okay. So I would probably say there's tighter risk management with the civilian airlines because obviously they don't want to crash or do anything bad. They just want to get up in the air, have a nice smooth flight, make sure everybody gets their coffee and highballs and has a good time. be done with it, where we're doing some pretty extreme stuff with our aircraft. So we push the aircraft and military all the way to its limitations on a regular basis.
And is there any type of difference when you're landing or to maneuver the plane, like compared military planes and commercials?
So every plane is completely different with especially like a landing profile. So we're like how gear. So we have the C-130 is a tricycle gear. So we got our mains in the back and we got a nose gear. Some of those older small planes, they have a tail wheel or tail dragger where they have the two mains up front and a little wheel up back. So it's a completely different landing profile for those guys. If you so with the tricycle gear, you'd roll out and you do a flare because you want your mains to touch, and then roll out and then put your nose wheel down. But for like a tail dragger, you don't want to flare because you don't want to hit your back wheel first and then it slams your mains down. You got to not flare and just let it come down, hit the mains, and then eventually your back will come down. That's from me. I've never done a tail dragger. That's just from the guys I know. But each plane's different. So like the C-130 has the biggest tail to fuselage ratio for any aircraft because it's built for slow flight, because it's meant to get in. So I say tactical airlift. We're meant to get people into crappy places and out of crappy places. And a lot of times that means it's extremely short runways, dirt runways. I've landed on lake beds before, literally runways built with seashells that other planes can't land on. So like our mains are literally the size of tractor tires. So we have massive tires. So the C-130 is meant to pretty much crash land straight ahead because we need to get in there and stop and then get people on and get out, depending on what we're doing.
How quick can they take off? I would think they need a whole lot of room.
So in peacetime for training for takeoffs and landings, we need 3,000 feet. A little bit more than half a mile. But if it's like actual wartime, we just crunch the numbers, and as long as we have a 500-foot buffer, we'll go. And depending on if you're light, and then altitude's a big issue. So if we're pretty light going out of a place, I think the shortest I've ever taken off is probably about 1,500 feet. We're going out of a place in Afghanistan, and we were extremely light, and we took off extremely fast, even though it was really hot outside, because that affects your performance as well too. Every place is different. But to answer your original question, landing stuff, completely airframe dependent.
Yeah. Is he on autopilot? Because I've heard that the pilot just stayed there. You just need to make sure the buttons are pushed or anything, and then just watch it.
Yeah, on civilian airlines, and this is just my buddies telling me, like, it will actually land you and then take you off on the taxiway if you want to.
Dang.
Which is pretty impressive. Now, C-130, because we have that big tail, we're a huge weather vane. So landing a C-130 and a little gusty, you just see us fighting it the whole time to ensure you got a smooth landing. But no, so the autopilots on C-130s, they're pretty good for up at altitude, straight and level. They'll do some ascents and descents, capturing some altitude. But for landing profile for a C-130, the last thing, we're mandated to take it at about 200 feet. So once you hit 200 feet above the runway, you're supposed to take control of it and land it manually. Technique, at least mine, was I would hate to get the feel for the plane and only have 200 feet to fly before I got to land it. So typically how I taught and how I was taught was to take it once you hit what's called the final approach fix to come on down, so you have a feeling for the aircraft all the way down. Because she's a huge weather vane, and it takes a little bit to get used because you're fighting with the yoke and you're fighting with the rudders sometimes. But some of the smaller planes, you don't have to fight it as much. So doing that is not that big a deal, depending on like your wind conditions. Yeah.
Have you ever got a chance to fly a helicopter?
No, I'm good. Those things fly on magic.
You don't want to mess with that?
No, yeah.
I've never been on a ride. You go on to like Hawaii or Las Vegas, and you can do these helicopter rides. And they've always interested me. I would like to do one.
No, I'm sure it's fun, but just like having some of my best friends that are helicopter pilots, it's just obviously we got to give each other crap. But like we would go. So when I went to advanced, and my buddies would go to advanced for helicopters, and we would just still talking about airplanes. And he's like, "Did you know there's no laws on how helicopters fly? There's 5 theories." I'm like, I don't want to fly on theories, man. I'm good. I like airplanes with wings. I'm good. Yeah, but no, they're pretty safe. But my first instructor, I always called them 1 million pieces of cooperating FOD. So FOD stands for foreign object damage, and it's just a term we use for just junk and stuff on the runway that you don't want to, pop a tire and ingest. It just means junk. So when we just say it's just a million cooperating pieces of FOD, it's just a million cooperating pieces of junk that's allowing you to fly.
Right.
But that's just banter between buddies.
Sure.
Yeah.
I remember I went to Arizona State, and we got the chance to tour a Boeing Apache helicopter.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Entire manufacturer.
Awesome.
I mean,
Nice.
you got patted down. I mean, we couldn't bring our cell phone. We couldn't bring anything whatsoever in there. But you were able to see one from absolutely the very first step all the way, like the finished product. It was pretty sweet.
Yeah. Did you get to see the Jesus nut? You ever heard of that?
If I did, they didn't. I feel like that's a term I would have remembered.
Yeah, so it's I don't know if it's every C-130 or every helicopter, but there's literally just one bolt and one nut that holds the rotor to the fuselage. So that's why they called it the Jesus nut. Like there's only one thing keeping us detaching from that rotor. So
wow.
And again, I don't know a lot about helicopters,
Right.
but yeah, my buddies were like, "Yep, as long as that Jesus nut holds together, we're fine."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Was there any high risk situation that you went through, like flying, that
Many.
you can think? Like what was the craziest thing that happened in your career?
There's definitely quite a bit that kind of fit the same category. I'd say one kind of basic one that was not in combat was we were in the Azores. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Azores. So it's the island chain out in the Atlantic. It's owned by Portugal, so it's a Portuguese culture there. It's about 5 or 6 islands, but Lodges is a town in one of the islands that the Air Force has had a base there that kind of coexists with the Portugal Air Force, and they've had it forever. It's an extremely long runway. It's very strategic for us to move aircraft, parts, and people straight through the Atlantic instead of going up the north route. So we spent a lot of time in Lodges. We had going out for a deployment. We had 2 C-130s we were going to take off, and we were going to meet, I think it was 4 or 6 Ospreys that were coming off the boat that we were going to meet up with them and refuel them and bring them all the way. I think it was to Rota, Spain. Well, we took off completely full of fuel, completely what we call bagged out. So the max takeoff weight for a C-130 is 175,000 pounds. And you don't have very good performance at 175,000 pounds. So you need kind of those long runways to get going so you can get up to takeoff speeds. As soon as we got up, kind of climbing up to altitude, we were flying formation. We were number 2. We had our flight lead, but we started to put fuel, what we call our cross-ship manifold. So we have all these different tanks, and we can pull fuel from any tank we want pretty much at any time, as long as everything's working. As soon as we started to draw from one of our big external tanks, we just had fuel just leaking like crazy, just spraying everywhere. We couldn't see where the leak was from. So fuel leaks are pretty bad for us, because especially if they get anywhere in the near the engine, they get in the intake, well, it can combust in a place that shouldn't combust. Mm-hmm. So we had to secure the manifold, which means we were limited to our engine tanks, which took away about 40,000 pounds of fuel that we were going to give to the receivers. So we were no longer able to continue on or give any fuel to the receivers, so we had to break off. Well, just at that time, storm cells. So Lodges is not, Lodges, the city, and then that island it's on is probably as big, not even as big as Warren County. It's pretty small. Mm-hmm. But a storm built right on top of it. So we had to go in and land, but you can't. So our props have reverse. So we can use reverse on our landing, and we can change the pitch of the prop, and it changes the thrust, and it helps us slow down. And then we have some pretty massive brakes as well. So when you have a fuel leak, you cannot use reverse at all. So we weighed just under max weight coming in for a landing, which doesn't happen very often at all. And we couldn't dump either, because anytime we would try to dump it, it would also leak out that same spot. And a massive storm built up around the runway, and there's little mountains, which causes the winds to go all over the place. So we didn't have much choice, and the procedure says land now, land immediately. So we had to land immediately. I was on the left seat, so I was landing. We came down, and we got the mains on. I didn't get the nose on, and a gust of wind came up, put us up again, and then came off. So when you lose that lift, you come smashing down again. And then we almost put a wing down. Luckily, I had enough lift on the wing of the procedure that I used to bring the wing back up. And we decided to continue on with the landing. and luckily it was a 16,000 foot runway because we couldn't use reverse. All we could do is brakes, and we got to a point we decided if we hit 4,000 feet left to go, we're going to burn the brakes. I mean, you'll catch it on fire. If you slam on the brakes, they'll lock up. You'll stop. You won't go off the end, which is a cliff into the ocean. But I'd rather be on the runway on fire than in the ocean. So luckily we were able to stop, and everything was fine. We found out what the leak was. We were there for a few days, got it fixed. But I'd say outside of combat, that was probably one of my most nerve-wracking landings for sure. I actually landed twice, so
yeah,
we had to count it as 2 landings. I think that was my nerve-breaking joke to the flight engineer. I was like, you better mark me down for 2 landings on that one.
Yeah. Now you have to get a certain amount of landings and takeoffs, just like a private pilot license. To
so there's your initial qualifications, what you got to do, and then for currency. Currency is like, if you want to stay current, you have to do so many landings, takeoffs, approaches, depending on like what it is. So like we'd always say it's like the basic flying. So yeah, you got to make sure you get your takeoff, landings, and approaches, which for military pilots, that's just our basic stuff, because we always focus on mission-oriented tactical stuff that has the same type of currency level. So you got to make sure you do this many max effort takeoff and landings, or air refueling. You got to do a certain amount of times within, say, a 3 or 6 month period. Airdrops, whatever our mission was, you have to stay current in it, because if you don't, then you got to get re-instructed.
Right. Do
it with an instructor to get recurrent, and then make sure you stay on that time schedule. Yeah.
But Eric, if someone younger, not even necessarily younger, but older, whatever, but I was just thinking younger, giving advice to some young man or some young lady, that it's like, I'm interested in flying. I would like to get a pilot license, or at least see what that's like, if that's a job or just a hobby that I would like to pursue. What steps would you recommend to someone like that?
First, watch Top Gun, and if you like it, then continue. But after that, there's so many different facets of aviation, whether it's flying or not, that you can get into. I'd say just Google training facilities anywhere, or local flight-based operation FBOs. And just go ask them. There's maintenance jobs. If you want to turn a wrench, you can turn a wrench on airplanes. If you want to fly, there's so many different jobs in aircraft, from just private pilot's license to fly on your own, charter. So I know some pilots that literally just flew for like millionaires and billionaires, just flew them around on their own schedule, and that was it. The airlines, there's tons of stuff. Military is always an option. And there's also schools. You can go to college and get a degree, and then while you're getting the degree, you can get pilot's license, and they'll get you your qualifications, like your private pilot's license, your commercial license. I don't think they'll get you their ATP, which is what you need to carry passengers, but they can get you like your CFI, your certified flight instructor. They might do that. So like SIU down in Carbondale has a good flight program. Dubuque University. They got a good flight program, but there's other colleges that will do that well. So you can come out with a degree in like aviation management or something like that, as well as having your flight certificates when you're done. Or you can just do it through an FBO on your own. So you'd have to read the minimum requirements for getting certifications. It's in the FAR AIM is what they call the book.
Yeah, but like you said, you don't even have to become a pilot, or if you're just interested in airplanes but stay on the ground, you can work on
like a lot of kids, a lot of my buddies started off their aviation career, they always loved airplanes. So if they're near an airport, they'd go get a summer job as the fueler. They'll move the little, because like a little Cessna, you can get a little hand tow. They can tow planes, so you can just have like a summer job for high schoolers going out and fueling airplanes, moving airplanes, just kind of doing that stuff. And you can get into management, airfield management stuff. There's a lot of different fast aviations outside of just flying.
And then before we wrap up, Eric, you've got experience in farming, military, now even just being young adults. I like to say we're not kids anymore. We've done a whole lot of trial and error in our time.
That's for sure.
But what advice would you have just for any young folks in general? Not even necessarily pilot or anything, but like what, when I got kids, I like always find myself preaching to them. I got a 12 and a 15-year-old, but like what's something that you would like
So as an officer, we'd always have to, any of our young Marines that were getting out, we'd have to kind of do a brief with them and kind of like, all right, what's your plan? We try not to just, kick guys out and say, good luck. Try to give them some guidance. So I'd say based on my trials and experiences and stuff is to realize like you're 18, you're 20, 22, like you don't realize how young you are. You can go do other things. Like colleges are great, don't get me wrong, but I think our culture pushes college too early and probably too much. Because they've shown the human brain isn't done developed until about 25, so you're not the best decision maker at that age. So go do something, go learn something, maybe a trade, go do that, and then figure out what you want to do later. Maybe college. It may not be, but that's okay. But don't be afraid to try something, especially if it's outside of our cultural norm of got to go to college, or whatever that may be. Takes time to have a plan, A, B, C, and D, maybe. Have a plan, but don't be afraid to just follow the crowd. And I've had some soapbox with some young guys because they'd be like, I'm going to college. What for? I don't know. I'm like, all right, you're going to waste your GI Bill on a degree that you have no idea what you're going to go do. Like you're already qualified in something, either stay in or go get a job turning wrenches or whatever you're doing out in the civilian world, and then figure it out instead of wasting your GI Bill. So I'd say just get as much experience as you can before you make any like big life decisions. Because you guys know, like you don't realize how young you really are.
Oh yeah.
At that age until you're like over 40, and you're like, man, I could have done a lot different.
Yeah.
But
no, I remember just even in high school, my parents trying to tell me stuff, and I'm like, you don't understand.
Trying to get through to them.
Them trying to get through to me was the hard part, I think.
It is. I definitely had a like glazed over face as Marines. Just give me that 1,000-mile-an-hour stare. Be like,
right.
All right, do what you want, man. But I've been there, done that. So I'm just trying to give you some advice and take it if you want. If not, you can lead a horse to water, but can't make him drink.
That's the truth.
That's true.
Well, thanks, man, for coming in today, Eric. I really appreciate it. Hope you had a good time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, we appreciate you sharing your experiences, and look forward to catching up with you on another time. Maybe not on the show, but would love to stay connected. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, man.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, Eric Adkinsson, guys. It's a Talk About It podcast. Victor Dantas. I'm Lauren Fulmer, and hit subscribe and keep on watching. We appreciate your support.
See you guys next week.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Talk About It podcast.
I'm Victor Dantas.
I'm Lauren Fulmer.
And we would encourage you guys to subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to hit the bell. It's going to be right below the video. So
hit the bell.
So you know when the next episode is up.
We appreciate all the support.
Thank you.